3, 2, 1. This is Own the Block Podcast, and these are your hosts, Josh Derriman and Pierce Burton.
This is Pierce Burton and Josh Derriman. Today we're going to be talking about some of the fear that's out there in the current market and things that we're seeing as mortgage lenders and real estate investors who lend nationwide, and from a lot of our investors who are buying in markets all over the country. Josh has prepared some slides for us for Colin to pull up. Josh?
Yeah, Pierce. The first one I wanted to talk about I thought was interesting is I was looking at the quarterly average for the change in home prices for quarter three. And so if you look at this chart, it shows really almost the entirety of the West Coast was negative for quarter three. And then you see a lot of green in central and southeastern United States. And so Florida did really well, Mississippi, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, that whole belt in there did really, really well. And if you're listening to the news, you would think that everything is crashing. And it's not really the case. There are pockets where it's definitely very soft, but there are whole swaths of the country where values are not dropping very much, or they're actually improving. Now this is lagging data, but I was surprised by that.
As you know, the media kind of is controlled by the coasts. So I think that has a large portion of the fear out there of the markets crashing is, you do see on that chart, I think I see New York there, as well as obviously California and the surrounding states of California on the West Coast. What do you think the main reason in your mind, Josh, that those southern states and Midwestern states are holding strong? Obviously, those areas are traditionally cheaper areas overall than the West and then the far Northeast.
Yeah, I personally think it's an affordability question. When you start looking at these, and a lot of these states that are green have more affordable housing, and so when you're looking at some of these negative areas, and New York's not down that much. It had a big leg down earlier in the year, but I really do think that what's happening is there's an affordability issue, and especially investors. You and I talk about it all the time. And there's a lot of the investors that are very focused on these green states that we're looking at, and it's because of exactly that. They're affordable. There's good rents. You can get a good price for the rents. So there's a lot going on in those states, whereas California, Oregon, Washington, prices are so much higher, rents are so much worse. It's really an affordability question to my eye.
Yeah, I think a stat that I see that is missed quite often, and something that I actually have looked at for particular markets for investing and not investing, is median home price compared to median household income. Because if the median household income cannot afford the median home price with current interest rates, basically meaning that their debt to income ratios over a certain amount, comparing median to median, then you're going to have a tough time for that affordability. And so you look at areas like California, and with interest rates rising, those homes have become unaffordable because everybody in that particular state is house poor.
Totally agree. One of the things that I wanted to talk about, everybody knows the adage that real estate's local. Right now, it's really hyper local. Particular neighborhoods, particular price points make a huge difference on whether you can get a good deal or not. I wanted to highlight a particular property. This one is in Sacramento. I'm on a Sacramento kick today, and so let's pull it up right now. So this particular house is a beautiful house. I would love to own it. It's on the market right now for $949. And so if you take a look at the history of this property, this seller started off at $1.3 million in late May. It was contingent for $1.3 million, and fast forward about 5.5 months, they're now still on the market for 25% less. Now the Sacramento market is not down 25%, but this is a good indicator of certain price points, especially the higher price points, really significantly above the median price for areas. You're really seeing pretty substantial discounts to what you would have seen 6 and 12 months ago.
Yeah, and I actually had a client call me, a couple months ago and asked me, he goes, what would you be investing in right now with the way interest rates are and the market? And I said, I wouldn't buy bigger than a home price below the median square footage, meaning I think the average square footage in the U.S. right now is 1,700 square feet. And I said, the first thing to drop is going to be those high-priced homes, and those 3-bed, 2-bath homes, those 4-bed, 2-bath homes, those are going to remain high because people aren't going to be moving out of them to upgrade into larger homes, and there's still going to be first-time home buyers looking to get in that market and investors looking to get in that market. And so I would continue to buy those at this current time, wait until those higher, larger priced homes drop first, and if you see an opportunity there where it drops low enough where you can still cash flow the property, then you purchase that asset class. But right now, stick to the basic blue collar housing.
When I was buying and flipping properties, that was my number one rule: is you stick within the affordability band. It may seem like a great deal to buy something for $2 million, but if the market changes on you, you're going to be out there trying to sell a house to very low single digits of the population, and that's what's going on right now. So there's areas, the Carolinas, you saw it on what you just looked at. The Southeast is doing really well, and in that affordability band, that's where you want to be right now. And there are, oddly enough, still great deals to be had, but it depends on the locale, it depends on the neighborhood. You have to be careful about that. Pierce, one of the questions that everybody asks is, where do we think the market is going? Are we going to continue to leg down? Is it going to be a kind of a short recession and then prices are going to pop back up? You and I have gone round and round about it. I'm of the thought that what the Feds have done so far, it's been very predictable. They basically said what they were going to do. We're starting to kind of, we did a 50 basis point increase. It looks like they're going to do a 25, and then they should start become a little dovish. And we're already seeing in the mortgage side, we're seeing interest rates improve, and I'm predicting that beginning of next year, maybe into Q2, we're going to start to see pricing start to improve. We're going to start to see people getting out there buying. And so from the investor perspective, what do you think is happening?
So I think from an investor perspective, I've always said this: if you have the money to buy, you should buy now. Because if interest rates go up, there's so many clients that have been waiting for those rates to drop, and I think we're going to see appreciation like we haven't seen it before. So I think if rates just get back down to where they were pre-pandemic levels, which I think we were sitting right around a primary residence interest rate of about 4.75, which I think for about 5 years was normal. Once that happens, which I think you're right, around Q2, I think we're going to have a wild summer of real estate buying. And so buying today might earn you 10 to 25% in equity in the next 12 months. I really believe that.
That's a good point. We oftentimes we're looking at what the discount was against a property 6 or 12 months ago. But if we do have kind of a shallow drop and then it starts to push back up, it should push back up pretty quickly. Prior to COVID, And then immediately after, we saw kind of a reduction in pricing. And we were seeing it for obvious reasons. And then once we started to come out and people could start buying again, seeing houses, things took off. And I think we're going to see that again once people start feeling more comfortable, rates coming down, inflation coming down, gas prices coming down. I think mid 2023, there's a very good likelihood that it's going to be a little bit bananas.
Yeah, real estate has that crowd mentality, right? And there's a lot of things that have that. But that crowd mentality, if you follow the crowd, sometimes you might end up jumping off a cliff, right? And definitely feel like that's kind of happening right now, where people are hearing that things are going to be going bad, and it's the difference between today and 2008 is this is all basically Fed controlled in a way. And we don't have a bunch of arms out there. We don't have a bunch of bad loans. There's no negative amortization loans out there. And so there's really no reason for a crash other than interest rates are up.
I was in the middle of it in 2006, 7, 8. I saw everything that happened, the aftermath. There was absolutely, right before everything crashed, it was crazy. People were doing stated, no doc, don't verify income, don't verify assets. People trying to flip properties for $5,000, $10,000 profit. It was crazy. It was very, very frothy. And even at the time before it completely crashed, I had indicators. I was getting out of the market. The current market as it is, I don't see those same things. Like there are the buyers out there. You're not seeing people get loans where they can't afford them. There's more controls than there was in 2007 and 8. Pricing, even though the prices are higher when you take into account inflation, it's not nearly where we were. It really does feel like even though we're going through an inflation issue, which hopefully is temporary, that we're still in a relatively healthy place compared to where we were in 6, 7, 8.
Yeah. When I first got in the business, and I think I told you this story, had a guy call me, one of my dad's best friends, and it was when rates were starting to drop, and he needed some money out of his house to fix it up and sell it. And he goes, Pierce, I gotta do this loan for you, and I can tell this. Or do this loan with you I can tell this story only because the statute of limitation of being able to take people to prison is definitely up. So he bought his house in like 1993, and apparently he walks in the bank and he cannot get a loan. And so he goes to my father, and my father was a general contractor. He was a general contractor, and he goes, hey, Larry, I'm trying to buy this house and can't buy it because don't have any income documentation. My dad literally takes his P&L and says, and throws this guy's name on it and goes, here you go, try this. And he walks into the bank, and he tells me this whole story. He walked into the bank and he hands him this P&L. Banker looks it over, and the banker stands up, and he goes, I thought the banker was standing up to get security or tell me to get the fuck out of the bank. He stood up and he said, congratulations, Mr. Blank. We'll have no problem getting you this house with this. And he's like, we closed the loan a week later. And that type of thing sure as heck is not happening in today's market. Do you have a funny story about maybe the craziest loan with the least amount of documentation you were able to do or something like that back in the day, Josh?
Oh, we could be here for hours and hours. I remember once I had a nurse, and she was sick, and so she needed some money to take care of herself. And we did a no income, no asset loan for her. cash out to 100% financing, and it worked out really well for her. That's a terrible fucking story. I'm going to tell you a better story. The woman died.
And she still got the loan?
Of course she did. She died after we closed, but
okay.
No. Here's my story for you, and it's actually going to be from your dad, because I knew your dad back in the day. And so it was the house right next to your dad. You know the house. And he came to me, and his income was a complete disaster. And at that time, we had a lender, ubiquitous lender at the time, that would do negative amortization. And they were very, very liberal in what you could allow. So he worked for your dad, and your dad wrote up a handwritten pay stub. Hey, I pay, Joe Blow X amount of dollars per week. And we funded a negative amortization loan with, I think, 25% down on a handwritten pay stub from his employer.
Who was my dad?
Who was your dad? Who was your dad? And as you know, these days that wouldn't even get out the door. Like, we'd get thrown off the third story of our building by the underwriter. That would never fly. At the time, they were like rubber stamp all day long, 25% down neg am with this ridiculous note from an employer.
Very quick story is I had a buddy's dad call me, and he goes, he's self-employed, and he's complaining about how hard it is to get a loan these days. And he goes, yeah, back in the day, I bought 2 primary residences on the same day with 2 different banks. And so the moral of the story of all these stories is these things are not happening today, people. And so we're not even close to the same market that we were in 08 at all. And you're starting to see some of these hedge funds even be bullish about buying again. I've read some different things on that. You've seen that as well, Josh?
Yeah, no, there's not the shenanigans that were going on in 2008. We've seen some things happen. We've seen the Zillow come into the market and try to be an iBuyer. We've seen some companies come in and try to pay cash, help buyers pay cash. Those guys are largely gone, and so we're shedding some of the nonsense, but it's not crazy stuff. We're just shedding some of the nonsense and getting back to kind of a healthier market for buyers. But if you think about it, if you have 100 buyers a year ago that were out there looking to buy, you might only have 75 right now because of concerns about the market, interest rates, inflation, all of that. But if you have 75 buyers out in the market versus 100, it's actually not that bad. Like we were going gangbusters a year and 2 years ago, and so it's backed off a bit. But it's not like it's rock bottom. We're at 25% of the volume. So 3-4 months ago, we were talking about whether or not there would be that blood in the streets, crazy discounts, and it doesn't seem like that's where we're going.
Yeah, and I think one thing that's going to keep housing prices up for a long time and continue to make houses just more unaffordable altogether is the lack of blue-collar workers. What kid grows up in today's day and age and says, I want to be a construction worker? It doesn't happen. And in fact, I can't remember basically anyone under, I'm 31, anyone under my age. I don't know a single person that is in the construction handyman type of business. And everywhere you go, people are like, I can't find someone. And so that worker is going to become a premium in the space, which is only going to drive the cost of housing up, even because if you can't build the house for a certain price, then housing becomes even more of an asset. And so I think that's something that's not seen. And I remember thinking that when I was 18 years old, nobody wants to be a construction worker these days. And so you're not going to be able to build homes.
I mean, I joke about it, but it does feel like there's a large segment of the population, or I should say larger than it normally has been, that just don't want to work. And the idea of getting out there with a hammer and nail and going out there, you're just not seeing it. And as we've discussed before, building a house is a pain in the ass. And you're just not, we had a client last week that was going to build a house, a new construction, and she backed out after she realized all of the drama, expense, time that it would take to build a house, when she could just buy a house that's pre-existing for less than it would cost her to build a house. And so right now, it costs you less to buy a pre-existing house than to build a new house. So going back to our Sacramento discussion, so this slide is the monthly median price in Sacramento County. And this is just interesting to me. And statistics are lies. There's so many ways to make something work. But what this is showing us is that in January, and if we're looking at the blue line, January of 22, the average home price in Sacramento County was $515. And if you go all the way over to right about, looks like September or October, it's right about the same price. So you had some increase mid-year, and now we're right about where we were at the beginning of the year. And so if we think about that original slide that I showed, where California was down like 3.5% for the quarter, well, this, for just Sacramento County, this is a pretty good indicator, is that we're basically back to where we were in January. We may go a little bit down. Sacramento County, I think, is a little bit harder hit than some other places, but it's not some massive drop.
One thing that I think that's forgotten, Josh, is January, especially in colder areas. I don't think it matters as much in maybe Florida, where I live, but it's much more hot in the summer in terms of housing market. And so traditionally, prices do fall in January anyway, and homes sit on the market longer. So it'll be interesting to see what happens this next summer, because typically, I've always said this to clients, the best time to buy a home is in January or February on a home that was posted in November or early December, because that home has been through the holidays, and that person's been sitting at home at Christmas going, man, I really need to sell my house. I just bought all these damn presents for everybody. And people don't think about that, but I love buying homes in January, February. Best time of the year to buy a house.
Absolutely. And you're right. Putting your house on the market November, December, October is really tough, because it's not really the buying season. And then you go through this slower period, and you end up having sellers that are just absolutely anxious to get rid of their property. And so you start hitting them up in January, maybe early February, you're going to get a discount.
So save that Christmas money, and don't buy anybody any gifts.
I was going to get Colin something, but changed my mind. So Pierce, before we end the podcast, I wanted to talk about something. We get a lot of investors that are nervous about where interest rates are right now. And what I like to talk to the investors about is it doesn't really matter where the interest rates are now. We're definitely seeing them go down. We're seeing Fannie Mae came out, said that they expect primary residence rates to be in the mid-4s. We're seeing very predictable movement downward. We're seeing inflation come down. We're seeing the market start to improve. What are you telling investors? What do you think about buying a property now and where the interest rates are now, and whether it makes sense to buy now and potentially refinance 6 months down the road, whether buying now at a price discount makes sense even at higher interest rates?
So I think there's a large community out there that's worried about cash flow on every property in its current state and in the current state of the market. The truth is if you buy properties now and over time, you're going to have a positive cash flow at some point, even with the interest rates of today, right? And so anytime I do a real estate deal, I'll talk to my dad about it. And first thing my dad asks me is, well, what's your monthly positive? And within the last year, I started telling him, it doesn't matter what the monthly positive, it's about the collective of all my properties and whether they cash flow, because I'm in the growth phase. I'm not living off of that monthly income, and most of our listeners aren't either. So as long as your collective gives you a positive cushion, then you're going to be fine. And as interest rates drop, you can refinance and take advantage of that refinance. But right now, I'm not even looking at cash flow on my deals. What I'm looking for is value add type deals or stuff being sold at a discount, which is easier to find now than it has been in the last 3 years. So, that's the type of thing that I'm telling clients. And we can't play the prediction game, but rates aren't going to stay like this forever. And when they do, as long as you're buying properties that maybe barely cash flow or just pay for themselves or have a slight negative that you can handle with your current income, then you're going to be all right.
One of the things that we never really touch on, you and I personally, and we can't really talk to our clients about within too much depth, are the tax benefits of owning property. So even if your property barely cash flows or it's slightly negative, the tax benefits that you get on having investment property are huge, and can even if nominally it looks like you're taking a little bit of a loss, when you take into account your tax benefits, you actually get a lot of benefit from owning a property, even if it's a loss.
Sure. And one thing I always tell, I have some wholesaler friends, realtor friends, house flipper friends, people who don't own any real estate. And I've never seen anybody be wealthy off of those three activities. You can be rich for a little while, but you're going to work until you're 80 years old doing those things, because you are not getting the tax benefits from it. I have a buddy actually who's here in Sacramento who does house flipping, and he started keeping more properties. And he's like, I wish I would have done this a long time ago. He's like, I'm behind the eight ball. I had all the sources for, I had the contractors to fix these properties up. I had, the good deals, and I was selling them to end investors for a quick profit. And holding that real estate, you're going to have a lot more tax benefits. I own over 200 units, and I've never paid $1 in income taxes on my properties, and because I just cash out refi them. I've only ever sold one property, primary residence, that I lived in for 3 years, so there was no capital gains. Thanks for joining, everybody. Next week, we're going to have Thomas Zettergren on the podcast. He works for a turnkey real estate investment company. This company basically buys homes from wholesalers, fixes them up, and then sells them to end investors, and then they also manage the property for that end investor. Most of those investors being out-of-state real estate investors who are buying their first 1 to 4 properties typically.
I'm excited about the guest. He's going to be a very good guest. This is going to be some good information.